Well, thank you, everybody. We can certainly jump into the senior center. The town meeting warrant, town meeting, by the way, is May 15th. It's important that you all show up. We'll talk about what articles. There's more than one article required to get the senior center built. So I want to talk a little bit about those today. There are 29 articles on the town meeting warrant. I think it's the smallest town meeting warrant in recent history, if not history. It's a good sign, I think. We're focused on a number of really significant topics, but there's not a lot of other things for those folks who don't want to spend 5 or 6 hours or multiple nights at a town meeting. This is a good town meeting to go to, and there's a couple of really important topics on there. I think the lead of that is the senior center facility. So let's talk a little bit about that. There are several articles required to get the senior center built. In fact, I think there are 4 articles to get the senior center built, believe it or not. And we'd like to make things simpler in government, but in this particular case, it's a challenge. So the 4 of 29 articles relate to the senior center. The first article is associated with the fact that the owner of the land is donating a portion of that land to the town to build the senior center. So fairly near the beginning of the town meeting warrant, I think in the first 7 or 8 articles, is an article which allows the town to accept that donated land. So anytime a municipality has donated something, the Board of Selectmen are required to accept that. When that donation is land, town meeting must allow us to accept that donation. So even if someone was giving us 100 acres to build anything, town meeting requires approval of that. So we would need approval to accept the donated land to build the senior center on. So we're asking for your support on that. It'll be pretty evident from the warrant article. It'll, beyond the words in the article, will be an explanation of the purpose of that particular warrant article. So that's the very first item. Without the donation of land, we don't have the land to build the senior center. Right? Next up from that is the capital improvement article, where the funding for the senior center is. It's the 7th of 7 projects within the facility master plan. You may recall there's this town hall renovation, the fire station, the kindergarten facility that's currently under construction. This is the last of the 7. It's a little under $6 million in construction costs, and that'll be in the capital improvement article. So it doesn't stand alone in its own article, it'll be part of the capital improvement article. It's the largest item we're funding in the capital improvement article is the senior center, by far. In fact, I think we're seeking about approximately $8 million in total capital funding, and $6 million of that is the senior center. And that should cover the cost necessary to build it. Finally, there are 2 other articles required. Those are zoning articles to make this all work. So first, we need to acquire the land by donation. Second, we need to make sure we can pay for it. And the next 2 articles relate to zoning changes, because the parcel we're placing the senior center on will also have some residential housing on the same general space. So it's an Columbus space and the home lot to the right of that space. And that developer has agreed to donate the land and do some of the preliminary site work and engineering work, all for free, and in turn is also building a residential development there. You may remember that the proposal in that residential development was for what's called a 40B project, or a comprehensive permit project, of a 5-story series of buildings with 164 residential units, some of which were 3-bedroom units. Under what we've negotiated with the developer, they would take that 164 units, make sure that it does not exceed 135 units, drop the height lower from what was originally proposed by at least 1 story, bring the distance away from the neighborhood by at least 20 more feet, and donate sufficient land and parking to build the senior center. So 2 zoning articles are required to make sure they can construct what they're proposing. And so when we get to that, it'll be evident when you see the town meeting warrant, which should come out as early as next week, and you'll see the zoning article that'll actually indicate that this zoning change is going to be allowed to let this residential development move forward, and there in turn will allow us to build the senior center. So there are 4 articles. I'll make sure as town meeting warrant goes, as the process goes on at town meeting, to make sure that the folks in the room understand this zoning is required to make sure we can also build the senior center. This capital plan is also required to build the senior center. So it's going to
require 2/3 vote.
The zoning articles will require 2/3 vote. The capital improvement article will require 2/3 vote because we bond those. The first article, in the acceptance of land, I'm not sure is 2/3 or a simple majority. So 4 articles. I feel very comfortable with the support we're receiving from you folks and others. The selectmen have voted favorable action in all 4 articles. The planning board has voted favorable action on all 4 articles. The Finance Committee has voted favorable action on the capital improvement plan, which is one article they would vote on. The school committee has voted support for the project as well. So I feel very comfortable, other than town meeting is town meeting, you never know quite what's going to happen. I feel very comfortable that there is broad-based support to move forward on the senior center. And so obviously we hope your support as well on the project. But at this point, there's not a reason to believe that there'll be an opposition relative to the project. Any questions about that before I proceed to other town meeting articles? Yes.
If and when the new senior center becomes a reality, what happens to this space we're occupying as we speak?
Yeah, great question. So those decisions haven't been made. There's a number of different options. I'm not in a rush to decide, what happens here. There's all kinds of ideas, everything from commercial space to support Main Street to taking the building down and adding parking. I'm not a big fan of that, quite frankly, because I think we'll have sufficient parking here once we create the senior center. But a number of different options. We certainly have departments which are somewhat tight on space, so maybe part of the building will be used for that. Any number of possibilities. I'd rather now focus on getting the senior center done and built, and then give a lot of different folks input on what could happen in this space. But given the general condition, although it's not ideal for a senior center, can use improvement, I would lean toward retaining the space and finding some additional uses of it. Okay.
Andy, that old Mexico site, you said a part of that land would be given to our town. For the senior center in parking, how much?
How much in terms of square feet? Yeah, the senior center itself will have a footprint of 9,300 square feet currently as proposed. So it'll give me some latitude to understand that things change. So I would see this as a two-story structure constructed somewhere in the 13 to 14,000 square foot range, which is more than double this particular space, laid out in a way that's far more appropriate than what we've tried to get done with this space. And then likely that the space would also provide some second floor future build-out space depending upon programmatic need. So it's I would expect its full build-out space at the time we construct it to be more than twice this size, which is pretty consistent with what we've always said we think the space should be, 13 to 14,000 square feet. 9,300 or so on one floor and then a second floor. So maybe move the offices on the second floor so that most of the accessible, usable space is on one floor. And so that land has been donated to sufficiently accommodate that, provide some permitted plantings, an ability to go outside and be in a courtyard or have some outdoor space if we're ever going to have summer again. And I think someday maybe we'll have summer, but we certainly have some desire to want to do that. And a dedicated 80 parking spots, which we believe is appropriate based upon the needs we see here from a zoning perspective. 80 means that it is an average occupancy of, on those kind of spaces, it's 0.25 units for every person that shows up to a facility. So if we saw an average occupancy of a building of 300, then half of 300, a quarter of 300 is 75 spots. So we think 80 dedicated spots is a good level of dedicated.
300 people are going to be living in this apartment.
They have their own parking, completely separate. Complete. Well, they will have their adequate zoned parking. They're going to underground park underneath the proposed facilities. They'll have dedicated underground parking below their buildings and some surface parking. And you'll see on the plan that comes out with the warrant a dedicated area for parking associated with the senior center, which is a big part of what we wanted to make sure that there'd be dedicated parking to the senior center.
The reason I asked is there were some fuzzy numbers in the Eagle Tribune regarding the total size of the building, new building, and the parking lot. Now, if you're talking about 80 parking spaces, the minimum size of a parking space is 9 feet by 18, which is 162 square feet. And if you multiply that by 80, that's 12,960. That's a quarter of an acre.
There are 4.5 acres. Let's keep it up here. The bottom line is there will be 80 dedicated spots at zoning compliance sizes associated with the land that we're getting donated.
So
That's a fact. There'll be sufficient space to build a 9,300 square foot footprint senior center, which will likely be 2 stories to get you to the 13 to 14,000. That's in the plan. Whether it's measurement of 12, be a little bit beyond my pay grade. I'm telling you that what we're receiving as donated land is sufficient parking for 80 dedicated spots at the sufficient size by zoning. The entire site, when you combine parcels, is more than 4.5 acres, and we'll get sufficient space to do those two things. And that land will not be stuff land will be leased. It'll actually be donated. It'll be owned by the town of North Andover. Our control, our custody, our ability to manage, and there'll be an access into those spaces for that purpose. Again, I would expect in the night times and the weekends when the senior center isn't being used, we would expect some of the apartment folks, if people are coming to visit, may park in those spaces. Sure, that's okay. Happens here, out back. But we will receive sufficient land for 80 parking spaces and sufficient land to build the building.
How many handicap spaces?
Oh, we're way too early on so we haven't got to the design phase or the
Okay,
code
at
requirement.
At least 10?
I think we're early on that. Handicap, so the question was how many handicap spaces? I think that'll all be through, so here's what hasn't happened yet. We don't know what the building's gonna look like. We don't know the programmatic interior of the building. None of that has been decided. We first need to get to the point that the town agrees we should be accepting the land and paying the cost to build the senior center. That's where I need your help. Let's get that far. Then we'll form a committee which will include representatives from the various senior center groups and others who will design the building consistent upon what everybody's expectations are. In the end, that'll have to come back with some level of approval, probably through my office. Okay, I'm good to go. And so there'll be a design process, and you folks will be part of that process. And that's next. I can't even get that far until we get to the point of knowing we have zoning and dollars and we accept the land. So if you can get us that far, I think you'll be very satisfied with how we get beyond that.
What are the key milestones?
Yeah, so first milestone for me, first things first, is let's get to May 15th around 11 p.m. So if you can get us to May 15th at 11 p.m., that's the night of town meeting, and we can get the donated land, zoning, and dollars, then that's significant. It means that you will have a senior center. We don't know that yet. We don't know until those 4 articles pass, right? I think we're good on that, but we'll see what happens. We would then engage a design firm, so we'd form a committee, and then we'd engage in a design firm. It's not going to be a 35-person committee. You know, it's not going to be everybody in this room. I'd expect sort of a balanced folks that we typically include that have a sense of construction, some folks representing the senior population, whatever. We'll form a committee. That committee will work with the design firm and determine the proper program. I'd expect that to happen through the fall. So we'll hire a design firm, probably early fall. We'll have several meetings and different events to make sure that the design firm has the information they need. I would expect that the design firm would be ready to go on a project and probably bid it over the winter or spring. And then we award contracts for construction companies, make sure the bids come in at an appropriate level to fund the project. And then we begin construction. So let's talk about next summer as the beginning of construction. Again, give me some room on the timeline, but that's at least a reasonable timeline.
Excuse me.
Yeah, sure.
Pardon me, but where is this proposed site again?
505 Sutton Street there's actually 3 parcels, but it's the Knights of Columbus site directly across from the opening, the entrance to the airport. 4.5 acres comprised of currently 3 sites that will be re-subdivided to make into 2 sites. One will be the senior center site controlled by the town, and one will be the site controlled by the owner of the property, which is Minco Development. Other senior center questions?
Is it 55 and over?
It will not be a 55 over development, but it will include 20% of all units. There'll be no 3-bedroom units, which was one of the important milestones for the town. We think that we don't need 3-bedroom units. We need more studios than ones. And there'll be a larger than normal number of studio units. There'll be 20% of all units will be studio units.
Rental property?
It is rental, yes. Yep. Whether the senior center is built there or not, there will be a rental development on that site. That's a factual statement.
Repeat that, what you just said.
Whether or not there's a senior center in that location or not, this will be a large-scale rental development. So
There is virtually, my observation, no open land left in town. And I asked a month ago at the high school,
Yeah.
what's the name of the firm that we hired to help plan?
For the master planning company? Yeah.
I said, one of them talked about, I said, there's no open land. one of the senior members of that firm, he said, no, there isn't open land in town. And to build the senior center we're getting at a gift, we better take it, because I don't
Yes.
know what other church we should have. Whatever the land is open is wet.
Well, I think the options are either we do what's proposed, I mean, this is a fairly clear choices, or we redevelop this site, and the limits are obvious, right? The site itself is a problem. We could never construct something that would be adequate. It would be smaller than what's being proposed, and again, sort of jammed in the back of a building. We didn't build this space originally as a senior center, so it would be less space. It couldn't be programmatically designed from scratch. It would be sort of adding on, which is the problem. And ultimately, you don't solve the parking problem. And we have a parking problem out back. And so you can't solve that parking problem. So if for some reason this doesn't get approved, that's an option. We'll end up moving forward, so that's the next logical question is what happens if these 4 articles don't pass? Here's what happens. We use the dollars to add to an addition to this building. It's probably 50% less than the proposed new building would be if it were on Sutton Street. And I'd probably have to recommend to the Board of Selectmen they start to acquire land along Main Street to add parking. I don't think that's ideal either. I don't like to do eminent domain takings on land for parking, but we wouldn't have a lot of choices given the parking limits, right? So we'd probably add to this building. You'd end up with an improved building, not as ideal as the new site, and would end up with some parking limitations. Those are really the two, to your point, the 2 available choices, and I think that the choice in front of us seems clear. Building brand new, with you folks involved in the design, having sufficient parking, then freeing up the parking up back here because we don't have the senior center any longer means we don't have to go down Main Street and look to possibly acquire other property because the parking back here would now be sufficient. Other senior center questions? Yes, sir.
Do you know what the physical floor space of this is and related to the proposed floor space? What was the number on the proposed, and do you know what the number is on the space?
Yeah, it's a little over 7,000 square feet here, and I would expect that that site will be between 13 and 14,000.
Double.
About double.
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 Well, 160%.
Well, it depends. If it's 14,000, it's double. And if it's 13,000, it's 175%. But whatever the percentage is, it's clearly larger and be more.
Good.
And we're forecasting what the behavior of seniors coming along the line, whatever they were called, that they're going to function here and have the things in the new center that they want, and to make changes in management as far the functions, the programs.
The programs.
We don't know. So we're gonna double this building, and it's a forecast. Maybe we'll get the people here, maybe we know the town is growing slightly, but maybe the younger people, these people are 50 and 60, may not want to frequent this new senior. So it's a gamble to me. The amount of dollars you're going to spend and the amount of square foot, which is related to the dollars. We don't know the behavior, people.
Well, we can influence the behavior by calling it a community center.
Aha! Now you open it up to more functions, more program than just for seniors. That's the key.
Well, I think, so if we can, what I would, my compromise between this battle of 2 highly intellectual individuals is that it's probably both, right? So senior center doesn't seem any longer to be the sort of right term. Community center, which some communities have done, brings a different connotation, which brings in, I think broadens the generational use to 0 to 100 as opposed to maybe the issue of 60 to 100. I think we all have to recognize there needs to be a general rebranding of how we view folks, being a 55-year-old, right? A rebranding of folks to make sure that we understand that we are seniors younger and longer, and that maybe it's no longer a senior center in the truest terms, and I certainly recognize that we have to rebrand it. Community center, I think, may send the wrong particular message, but someone smarter than I can come up with a reference point which recognizes that we want folks to be here for any number of programs, very active programs, and in some cases, those programs for the younger seniors aren't going to be in a physical building, which is your point, Mr. Callahan. We're going to have to provide services and programs which aren't just a place to go, but also they're about places outside of it.
Community center occurs to me because Lexington called theirs a community center. Lexington had a nice advantage. Someone had a major estate next to the Masonic Museum.
Sure.
So they built onto the existing facility. They have a lot of programs, and they also built a swimming pool next to it, and they sold summer memberships, which brought in the whole community. Now, 10 years ago, we had a site that at one time belonged to a college, and the town had it, and it's been kind of a lost leader, if you will. Has anyone considered using, is it the Osgood? I can't remember.
We don't have a college, the college in town that we have is Merrimack.
No, but there's an estate that the town was using for a period of time?
Well, we own the Stevens Estate, but the Stevens Estate would not be an appropriate location for a community and/or senior center.
Yeah.
In the sense that if you've driven up the driveway, it's a nice venue for a wedding, as an example.
Yes.
But it wouldn't be appropriate in the middle of the winter to travel up those roadways to get the senior group. Nothing against your driving
Well, you walk
skills.
up there too.
So it's not inappropriate. We have done sufficient legwork to evaluate the sites. This is not, I think we're all being clear about this. When we started to talk about this 3 years ago, what was important was, if it was not going to be here, that it would be within 1 mile of this particular location, because the interest remains somewhat close to downtown. And to provide a kind of site which geographically and topographically was accessible. And the site that's come forward, the site that we've been able to work with the developer on, checks those boxes. Okay, if you cleared where we are now, and you told me we could build it here, and there was no town hall, there was no senior center, and we had adequate parking for all kinds of resources, we'd stay here, right? That's not an option. We have a town hall, it's not going anywhere, right? We have limited parking in the particular venue. We have spent sufficient time debating and analyzing the options. To me, the options are clear. We will either build on the site proposed or we'll build here. In the end, town meeting will make that decision, right? They will either say no to the road we're suggesting, in which case we'll build here. But we've promised you a senior center, and we're not going to continue to analyze ourselves into paralysis of making a decision. It's time to make the decision. It's time to build a senior center for your generation and the next generation, and the time is now. So ultimately, town meeting will decide whether it's what we're proposing or whether it'll stay on the site. I think that seems pretty clear. I don't think there's there's not another plan beyond that. Yes, ma'am.
Nobody gets anything for anything.
Yes.
Pico seems to be very good to us right now. What are we giving them?
Well, I think they have the opportunity. Their proposal originally, again, was to build 164 units of multifamily housing under what's called a comprehensive permit, sometimes referred to as 40B, an affordable housing development. I think in this we propose an opportunity to modify the zoning, therefore there's 2 zoning articles, to allow them to build a market rate development, which has less units. So otherwise, because they didn't have the required zoning, they would have moved forward under 40B, which allows them to avoid the zoning. So by allowing them or agreeing to work with them on zoning, it makes it more efficient for them to proceed with a market rate development. So given the zoning that's in place today, they could not build the residential development they propose. Therefore, they took the route of a comprehensive permit, or what's called 40B. I think everybody knows what 40B is. And they can use 40B to avoid our zoning to construct what they wanted. So we're partnering with them to propose 2 zoning amendments, which will allow them to avoid having to use 40B, and instead of a development that had more units and more height and more 3-bedroom units, have instead allowed them to build a market rate development, which is smaller in size, further away from the neighborhood. But it'll be a market rate development, which for them, the profit works out the same.
Is our senior center going to be like their clubhouse?
I don't know how that would ever be the case.
What's your question, please?
The question was, will our senior center be their clubhouse? A senior center will be a senior center. If there are seniors who live in that development, which I think would be a pretty nice development to live in, and those seniors want to use our senior center, the residents of the town, they should use the senior center. It's not a place for 25-year-olds to come and play, do whatever. It's a senior center. So if they're eligible to go to the center at 60 years old and want to take part in the programs we have, more the merrier. Yes, ma'am.
We have a critical need for emergency management, and we need to have probably generators and that kind of facility.
Yeah,
We have
it's great.
warming station and stuff.
Excellent
At the
question.
Senior center, so is that in the works? And please tell me you're gonna have proper generators.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I'd like to do in terms of, terms are important. So I'm going to address the question. Terms and words are very important when we communicate, especially in my arena, because sometimes we hear the term shelter, we hear warming station or whatever. Towns don't build shelters. The term shelter, which dates back to World War II and those kind of things, is not what local communities do anymore. Those are managed by nonprofits like the Red Cross. In cases of like major natural disaster where they are able to house people and put them up for days and days and days and deal with medical issues and issues of who's going to, do we have the proper cots. That being said, so we're not in the shelter business and neither is any other community regionally. But we have certainly found there's a need to provide warming stations robust enough to manage through what seem to be an increasing number of power outages, which I can tell you can be frustrating.
They're not going away.
And they're not going away. And this building is clearly not adequate to do that as currently constructed. So if you've been in this building during a power outage, we have a generator sufficient enough to get us basically in the room we're currently standing from the kitchen to the front of the building. Clearly the new building would be designed to be more appropriate in terms of a warming station. Meaning today, if at nighttime I walk in through this main front door, there's no power in that. So I come into a dark space, which doesn't make a lot of sense, right? This generator was installed, and it was a good effort to try to get it done because at the time it didn't have any generator, but today it's not adequate. So we're not building a shelter, but we will have adequate generator power to make sure that we have an appropriate warming station that can respond to those power outages and give you a space, and others in the community a space to do things. Today we find some folks go to town hall because the building has a strong enough generator to do it. They plug in, they may use electronic devices. So the senior center will be powered sufficiently enough, well beyond what we have today in this building, to have an adequate warming station to get us through those power outages. Absolutely. Including kitchen and more of the building. I won't necessarily commit to the fact that if it's a two-story building, it would be both stories, but certainly it will have a sufficient generator. It wouldn't be correct for us to build a facility any longer that doesn't have sufficient generator power to operate the building for a fair amount of time, given how often the lights are out, right? What follow-up question?
Yeah, follow-up is, we were told to go to Methuen if we were going, that's
Yeah.
kind of a stretch to get from here to there.
Well, the Methuen reference was to the possibility of the Red Cross opening a shelter. And again, I'm separating terms.
Okay.
Methuen was not so you can get to a warming station. We had warming station here. By the way, a lot of people don't use it, to be fair, because most people would prefer not leaving their home. Most people prefer not. That's why the town has, in fact, another article at town meeting will fund generators at 3 of the 6 common rooms for the housing authority properties. A recommendation made by myself and the fire chief. So we'll be adding generators to the common rooms of 3 of the 6 housing authority properties, because many folks in those developments would prefer staying on site rather than coming here. The Methuen reference was to the possibility of opening a Red Cross shelter. That has nothing to do with, no, it never happened. And quite frankly, during my 7 years, it may have happened only once. And in those kinds of, again, using terms, that's why I want to avoid the reference of any of our buildings being referred to as shelters. They are not shelters.
Warming means 8 p.m. and outdoor you go.
Well, it could be later, but it
It's
means
not
that
overnight, I know that.
if you think about the considerations, if you were holding a shelter, here's your questions. Do we have sufficient oxygen if people have oxygen? How do we deal with pets? 20 to 25% of every person who, family that shows up or individual has a pet. We got to manage pets. What if someone's allergic to the pets? How do we deal with food allergies? How do we deal with restroom facilities? Can people really get into bunks and get out of bunks? Do we have the proper medical staff? Those are all shelter questions, and it's why we're not in the shelter business. But we should be able to power this building, the new building, adequately enough to make sure that we have a warming station that runs for sufficient time, and this building will do that. Yes, sir.
When the town lost its power years ago, they had the people in here, the generator was strong enough to keep them warm.
It is.
Yep.
And they gave out blankets They had cots for all of them. They fed them in the morning and they fed them at night.
Yep.
And everybody got along wonderful.
I think I'm sure that has happened. The bottom line is this generator hasn't been removed. This is the same generator we're talking about. But it doesn't power the entire building here. It powers...
But it powered this floor.
It did.
It does
That
power-
generator.
Hold
Hold
on.
on. Hold, stop.
You're done. I want to speak about the
It's
generator.
important from my perspective that a conversation about warming station does not begin and end with just the senior population. That if you're going to offer a warming station to the community, there are families too. We have families in this community that were out power for 4 days in one of those storms. 4 days. And maybe they were on a well, and therefore their power, which powered the well, also didn't work. So when we talk about warming stations, it is not just because it's physically located in a senior center, doesn't mean that we would see this venue as only for seniors. So we need to make sure we have the adequate ability to provide that opportunity to several different groups, right? Everything that goes with it. I'm just making the point. We can do better at what we do as it relates to a warming station. I just want to avoid the belief that somehow we're providing a shelter, because shelter come with other constraints and other issues in terms of medical care and the like. So could we do better at what we do? Yes. Will this building will be adequately powered? Yes. But the idea that we would bring in medical staff or have medical staff to deal with those issues and how to deal with pets, I think was probably not makes sense.
The problem come up, they were talking about, what if somebody gets sick? And we all figured it out. It's simple, just go to the fire station, you can walk there, and they'll come in and take care of it.
Well, the fire station isn't there anymore. So that's one change, yeah. So again, listen, we are highly engaged with emergency management, police and fire, and we respond to these storms and responded well. When folks needed care, we picked them up. We delivered them either here or to a medical facility if necessary. All those things are happening. I'm just simply addressing the point. We were never a shelter here. That requires things going beyond even what you've identified, the blankets and the cots. It's other things like medical care and having the proper, the resources to support that. I'm simply saying that this facility today, with the growing community, no longer is sufficient to serve even in the purpose you've identified. And then nothing has changed other than the fact that the community's grown and the resources, right? And quite frankly, the power outages are more frequent, far more frequent, right? It's getting worse rather than better. And we are working with the utility company on that. But this facility will be an adequate warming center for the community's needs moving forward.
I just want to elaborate on the generator that Rosemary brought up. The generator sitting there, and I can see it from, is a 100 kilowatt generator. The one left over in the town hall is 150. That 150 heats, light, and functions in that large town hall. That machine that I can see from here is 100. Yours is 150. That machine is big enough to do everything in this building.
But it hasn't been wired.
And that's 100 kilowatts, 700 amps, and the 480 volts. The one is 50% bigger. That is, to me, it hasn't been wired correctly.
Correct.
That's the problem. The machine is big enough, because compare it with that one, 50% bigger. That lights up your hall, everybody that's employed in the town hall, all the heating, all the cooling, all the computers. That's only 50% smaller.
But hold on, let's understand where we are in the conversation.
Yeah.
The conversation is not about this space or this generator. The conversation is about tomorrow and the next day and the next day. And all I've simply said is, let's do it, let's support a senior center, let's build it right, let's power it correctly and wire it correctly, and we can stop talking about this particular generator. Because the proposal does not talk about the reuse of this, or buy a new one and power it
Well,
correctly.
the subject came up, Andrew, that if we had the power here, we could do a better job with the warming and shelter.
I appreciate that.
The power is here.
I appreciate that, but let's focus on what we're focusing on.
Okay, all right.
Let's get a new senior center built that has the programmatic need to get in a warming station. Because if in the next 12 months, I don't think we're going to focus on rewiring the used generator to power the rest of this building. Let's focus on getting done what we promised we would get done, which is build a new senior center and power it correctly. Can we agree to focus on that? I think that'd be rather important.
If this goes through, what is the timing?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about that. I'll be quick. Timing is that if town meeting approves it, we'd begin the design process in the fall, likely bidding in the winter or the spring of next year, with the construction beginning somewhere, say, early summer. Give me a couple of months latitude to that, because things in government sometimes take a while, but that gives you a general framework. This is about a 12-month construction. Fire station was 10 months, 10 or 12-month construction period to build the building, depending on site constraints.
You said that was $8 million?
Nope, $6 million, $5,900,000 and something dollars.
There is the bank there, tied to the parking in the back, that won't cost $8 million.
Yeah, it's going to cost me to take, anytime you modify an existing building, it costs you more than building new. So I'm not going to, so I'd have to take this building. I've built approximately $1 billion worth of public projects. If I could do this as a non-public project, you may be right. Welcome to my world. Everything we bid is twice as expensive and twice as long. I'm saying to you that if you want to stay on the site and you want us to go through acquiring the bank property, I'm not sure what that does for us. It means you're going to have to vacate this building while I'm renovating it, so you'll have no senior center for a year, if you're prepared to do that. We'll increase this building by about 50%, leaving you 4,000 less square feet than you would if you build a new center. And I have to go through the land taking process, which requires town meeting and making a payment to the bank to take their land. And what I'm acquiring is 20 parking spaces. So I don't want to get into the debate. If there are folks, we have spent years evaluating this. If there's a belief that you want to stay here and amend, that's an option. I know what I believe. I believe that building new on this site is the right approach. If you believe otherwise, or residents believe otherwise, that's their choice, and that's okay. And if the articles are rejected at town meeting, we will start the process of amending this building and modifying it, and addressing the generator in that case. But to me, we've done sufficient research that the debate about the choice seems clear, but it may not be clear for some, and I can live with that. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Are we done with the senior center?
It doesn't sound it.
I have 2 questions.
Hold on, how about not, let's finish the senior center first, we'll
2
go.
questions and a
Yeah.
compliment.
Yep.
This may be the last question on the senior center. Actually, it's really not a question. I've lived in North Andover for most of my life. Obviously, I'm senior right now. This is the project that I'm most interested in. And I tell you, I'm really impressed with you and what your staff has done here. This is absolutely amazing. I mean, to get a parcel of land that's probably valued at $500,000, more
It's a big deal.
for nothing. I mean, we can talk about little things, but the big picture is, this is so impressive. So, to you and the staff, great job. Continue, and don't forget us seniors, because we very much want to be involved in the specifics of this new plan.
Well, I just, first I appreciate it. I think, I think there's been a lot of people involved. We've been talking about this for, I think I was 40. No, we've been talking about this for a little bit of time, and I appreciate that. But it really has been you folks indicating your need for us to recognize what your needs are moving forward. And that is essential. And I think, as folks who are regular participants in town meeting, you folks, this is the steady group, right? It goes up and down around other groups. This is your opportunity, in my opinion, to advocate for your needs. Right? This is the opportunity. Do I see a bump in the road? I really don't. I will tell you that I've gone to school committee meetings. I think we brought the superintendent here another time. She's advocated for this project herself, to both the school committee who supports it and to the finance committee. So I think the community recognizes that you guys have waited a long time for this. I remember conversations about modifying the Brad Street School and everything that sort of went with that. This, in my opinion, is your opportunity, and I ask for your support because I think it's a good opportunity. No project is ideal. Nothing we've done, whether it's the kindergarten facility or even the beautiful modification of Town Hall, nothing is perfect. It's not ideal. But this represents an opportunity that I think just doesn't exist anywhere else. And for me, I will personally view it as not a success if we're taking a building which was not ever originally designed to be a senior center, the building you sit in today, and decide to band-aid it by modifying what it looks like and feel good at the end that somehow, because it's a little bigger and the paint is new, it's better. Because from my perspective, you will not have gotten what you deserve. And so, again, I think there certainly can be other ways to do it. I get that, I understand that. I don't believe there's not only one way to do things. And maybe, again, in a perfect world, if we could clean the slate and and move it in a different spot. But ideally, we have an opportunity to build new and get you involved in designing the future of a senior center, not just looking at living with what we have and putting an appendage to the front, right? And that's a rare opportunity, and I think you should take advantage of it, and would appreciate your support. Any other senior center questions? That's enough senior center questions.
Mr. Tierney had a question.
Mr. Tierney.
Two questions and then a compliment. What is the percent of the retired to the working people in the town?
I don't have that percent.
What's this question again?
The question was, what is the percentage of the sort of ratio, I guess, of retired folks to working folks in the community? My guess would be fairly close.
Yeah.
About 50/50?
Yeah, I mean, if it was,
How many?
it might be 60.
6,500 retirees in town? And about 6,000 or 8,000 workers, so it's, you know,
Yeah, sounds pretty close. 50-50 wouldn't surprise me.
50/50.
How much is the liability on, and I'm gonna say this wrong,
Sure.
of the OPEB, of the future liability of the town?
So OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. It is the future cost of health insurance benefits paid to retired municipal employees. That's a mouthful, right? But that's a hot topic. It's been a hot topic for any number of years. So at some point, I will retire. I'm counting down, not up anymore, Bill. It's okay. I don't mind. I'm not. It's fine. And when I retire, I will be entitled to health insurance until I pass away, or depending on the health insurance or the retirement plan I accept, until my spouse passes away. And so that could be, hopefully, quite a period of time, right? There's a liability associated with that, since you'll have to be paying a portion of my health insurance until I pass away. That cost of that health insurance for retirees who were municipal employees is what's referred to as OPEB, Other Post-Employment Benefits. Just means health insurance for retired municipal employees. The liability, the town's liability, if we had to pay all of that today for the current employees who will retire, the current retirees, is approximately $108 million.
Are we working on it?
We have formed a committee to work on that. So what's changed is the federal government did never ask municipalities to talk about this stuff. We just pay every year what the cost is, so what we call pay-as-you-go. So we get a bill for health insurance. Our health insurance bill in the community is $11 million a year. So out of a $100 million budget.
This is the retirees?
This is all health insurance, retirees and active employees. On an annual basis, we pay approximately $11 million. So about 11% of our overall budget, including everything we do, water, sewer, senior center, and the like, goes toward health insurance. And the federal government changed several years ago, was the federal government said, we want you to make a note in your financial statements as to what that liability is. We're not required to pay the liability, only pay every year what that year's cost is, what they call pay-as-you-go. So every year we pay the $11 million. The federal government is now saying it's more important that you develop a plan to determine how you're going to pay for that. They still don't yet require you pay it off. They're just saying you should have a plan. We have a committee that's been formed. We've set aside, there will be 2 articles on this town meeting warrant which moves money into that liability. We have a reserve fund that's a little over $2 million. Most communities, will not fund all of the liability, but put sufficient money in reserves so that if at any one year or multiple years things got really bad, you'd be able to cover that health insurance cost. I think the committee's ultimate goal would be to make sure that they have 1 full year of money in reserves to cover for health insurance if everything happened to go really south. And that number today is around $11 million. So I think ultimately the committee will recommend we establish a goal to get us to what's referred sometimes, sorry to add more acronyms and words, but ARC, and get us to about that $10 or $11 million level over time. I think it may take us, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, but we'll eventually get to feeding that account enough to cover that sufficient amount of that liability for people to be happy.
Related to when you retire, we're talking, would you be eligible, people like you, for Medicare?
I am Medicare eligible because I started in the private
So what
sector.
you're talking about is a supplement.
Yes, supplement.
A supplement.
Yeah, but not all people are Medicare eligible.
Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Pilgrim, what have you. That's what you're talking about.
In some cases, supplement, in some cases, it's not. So we have employees who would never have been, so Massachusetts public employees are not subject to Social Security.
So they
And when-
don't have any Medicare?
If they started and were in public employment for their full time, they would not be Medicare eligible. If they somehow served 40 quarters, I started in the private sector, or their spouse was eligible, then they may be Medicare eligible. But for some employees, they never become Medicare eligible because they were not in a Social Security related system. Most of our folks do, one way or another, are Medicare eligible, but not all of them. Sorry, Mr.
That's all right, now my compliment. The last two storms that we had, I would like to thank you and your staff for an outstanding job in cleaning up the roads, getting the power company in here, and we were out of power for 4 days, 3.5 days.
Crazy.
Compared to the other communities around us, I think you did an outstanding job.
Well, I appreciate it. In this case, I do not a lot, make a lot of calls, and we have a tremendous staff. We are all disappointed with the situation of things, the sort of how things are working right now. The fact that every time there's a storm, we expect the power to go out. I mean, that's, we didn't expect it in the past. It just happened. Now we expect it, and I think that changing dialogue is disappointing. I've been pretty outspoken regarding the utility companies where I think they are at, and I continue to work with them in the legislative delegation to communicate, to try to find ways to make the system better. It's not all about tree limbs falling on trees. It's just not. It's a lack of investment in infrastructure. That's what it is. And we can tell because we know which sections of town go out, and we know when it is a tree limb, which it may be, and we know when it's not. And so we continue to work with the utility company to try to find ways. The staff is great at responding to what happens out there in terms of power outages. We do have regular, multiple times in any day contact with people from National Grid to try to prioritize things. And so when residents tell us, here's what my need is, here's my risk and concern, we try to focus resources on that. I appreciate the compliment. Staff has been great. Let me transition that to the sort of tree limbs. So we are $774,000 over budget in snow and ice this year. We'll manage through it. One of the things that's changed in the last couple of years is that we build our budgets with enough flexibility not to have to stop and change how things work. We'll figure that out. Where in some communities they literally have to stop operating to make it to cover that. And this year, that would be most years that would be the big pain and suffering. In this particular year, it's what happened as a result of one of those storms, where we lost a tremendous amount of limbs and trees, to the extent that, quite frankly, we're going to be addressing those for months. So I appreciate the patience that the residents have shown. I can tell you that if you read newspaper articles or drive around anywhere in the region, North Andover is not alone. Limbs are everywhere, on every corner. We have committed 4 full-time crews to tree limbs. We brought in private contractors to pick up tree limbs and get rid of the ones that are in the more risky related circumstance. We have decided to add a curbside pickup of branches the last week in April going into May on the day of Trash Day. Look at the town's website for specifics. We're opening Sear Recycling Center longer to try to take care of it. But this is not a 1 week. This is, I'm telling you, you should expect to see limbs and sort of down branches for an extended period of time. And if you don't realize this is a regional problem, then you need to drive around the region and realize that. I have coordinated with mayors and managers in the entire Merrimack Valley, stretching from what I call the southern Merrimack, I guess it would be North Merrimack Valley, anyway, from Andover up through Salisbury to write a letter to the legislative delegation and to the governor seeking funding to offset the costs that we're incurring to bring on staff. We've sometimes brought staff in over the weekend. Around Easter, I wanted everything in this area focused on. We have a lot of folks driving during the Easter holidays, as an example. We committed weekend staff to picking up branches and limbs through the area. And so we're incurring costs beyond that sort of upside down snow and ice budget. We're incurring tens of thousands of dollars to address tree limb problems. And so we're writing a group letter for the region to the governor's office, the legislative delegation, to see if they can provide some funding, because Merrimack Valley was hit like no other region of the state in regards to what happened in one of those storms.
I called the DPU Monday or Tuesday, and they said, if the limbs come down on the town property,
Yes.
if the limbs come down on your property, Callahan, you take care of it.
That's only for
I know
you.
what you're saying, Andy.
It's only for you.
There's the Callahan rule and there's the... Oh, that's good. Pretty good? Yeah. You know, we have caller ID. This is Bill Callahan. Make sure we pick up nothing at Bill's house. So, what I would say is this. I would say this. Everything that is a public tree, we're certainly focusing on. Anything in which limbs have fallen in the public way that have come off a private tree, we're being generous about that pickup. We're not throwing that back onto the private property. If there are limbs but we do find, no disrespect to our residents, that folks take some liberty on that, and the tree limb out back somehow ends up out front, because there's no, right? Then in those cases, we're probably not quite as generous. But what we've added, which I just mentioned, is that if you put your tree limbs, again, 6 inches or less in size, in 4-foot bundles and wrap them with twine and put them on your curbside, the last weekend, I believe it starts, and please refer to the website, I think it starts the week of April 29th into May. That week, prior to the first leaf pickup week, we're going to go to everybody's curb on the day of trash pickup and pick up those bundles. Okay? So even if it occurred in your backyard,
Even the ones in my backyard.
if you can bundle them up, and well, you can't do that because we exempted you. But everybody else in town will be allowed to bring those bundles, even if it fell in the backyard,
Specific
bundle them
size.
up. Specific size, then you leave them at curbside. We'll send our crews around following the trash trucks. If we don't get to all of them in one day, which would be really difficult to do, so it'll be a track, then just leave them out. They're not going to fall apart like trash does. We may get back to you in the following week. But we're picking up at curbside in that last week in April, early May, on the day of trash pickup, to add to whatever else we're doing.
Thank you.
Don't call DPW again.
Just keep up the good work.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Other questions? So we also have there's, I would say, the other major article or articles on town meeting relate to the recreational complex off of Chickering Road. Questions about, anybody know what that is? So currently Hay Stadium, the home of Hay Stadium, some baseball and soccer fields, and some underutilized spaces. Is an area of town that the town has not improved for decades, quite frankly. I think we've walked away from Hay Stadium close to 2 decades ago. And there's a proposal to reinvigorate that space by investing a significant amount of dollars, $8,750,000. It's nearly 20 acres of space. And use that space for multi-generational space, an amphitheater for small concerts, a perimeter walking path so that folks can walk in some area other than, say, the existing tracks. There'll be some ball field spaces, there'll be bocce courts, basketball courts, an opportunity to transform that entire region so that everybody in the community could use it. We'll still be able to shoot fireworks off from there, but now you can imagine families and others hanging around that area. You can imagine seniors bringing their grandkids to a ball game and being able to have the ability to walk around the perimeter area there. It's an extremely exciting proposal, the largest, most significant, most important open space recreation project in town's history. And there are 3 articles that affect that project. One is that the schools have agreed to transfer the ownership of that parcel to the town. So the care and custody of the recreation complex piece would be transferred to the town. They'd retain ownership of the middle school project side of the project. They'd retain ownership to the ECC kindergarten Atkinson side. And carved out in the middle is, again, just under 20 acres of property that would be the town's responsibility, but would be home to this community recreation complex. That's one article early on in town meeting. Then the funding of that project will come from 2 different places, the CPC and towns.
Funding by the CPA
CPC, yeah.
/ committee
Yes,
of $6 million?
$6 million, yeah. Absolutely.
Does anybody realize $6 million from a separate group called the Community Preservation Act? What that is? Maybe Andrew will give us a definition. And then I won't ask.
So the CPA is a supplemental tax the town approved in 2001. We were the first or second community to approve that tax. At the time it was originally adopted, the state did about a 75% match. That's declined to about 15 to 18%. Again, we're the first or second community to adopt it. It can be used for basically 3 types of projects: open space, historical preservation, and affordable housing. So every year, the committee has an amount of dollars available to use on those kinds of projects. In the past, going to the open space piece, the committee has funded a number of open space projects, preserving everything from a farm out in out country to some land across on Osgood Street,
Half Mile Hill.
or the area around Half Mile Hill. So the committee uses those dollars for those three categories: historical preservation, open space, and affordable housing. And so one of the places that I would say that they've contributed less to, so they have to commit 10% of the dollars to those three categories at a minimum, and then beyond the 10% for each of the three categories, the 70% that remains can go toward any of the three. So a minimum of 10% for each, and the remaining 70% to any of those three categories. I would say the predominant dollars were spent actually have been in preserving open space. And I think that's great, and I think in a community that has had a lot of open space and has grown over the times, it's important. I would say that it's also the area of least contribution has probably been either the affordable housing or the recreation open space, the historical preservation to a certain extent, and they were also allowed to fund recreational spaces, and they've funded less of the dollars have been committed to that area. And this is an opportunity to take this space and really transform it. The CPC has approved the funding for that using existing dollars, and I think it really is a community-wide project that's going to be the kind of place where you can imagine families and seniors and others going. I could imagine as we talk about programs, someone was talking about programs needing to change that we're not based in a senior center, being able to bring seniors to a facility like this and use it for various programs, walking groups and all those kind of things, where we don't really have that venue today. This will provide that venue, especially during the day where it's really not going to get a lot of use. Being able to bring people to this kind of venue and have that kind of completed open space that will be used for all generations is a really important project. So to me, the senior center is sort of 1A on the town meeting warrant agenda. 1B is this recreational complex space, which is, again, will need an approval by town meeting to transfer the ownership to the town, meaning to my office, and then 2 articles that fund that, one being the CPC and one being an article I'm proposing to fund the balance of it. Yeah, so that's 3 articles. You can see the warrant is primarily the senior center and the recreation complex represents 7 of the 29 articles.
Yep.
So we'd appreciate you supporting that as well. Other questions about the warrant? Yes, sir.
I'm not on the walk.
Good. No.
I have a question could you give me an update on Peter Street, the construction going on there now?
Yeah, it seems like that is a everyday occurrence, right? Right now, they've got some utility companies in there doing some additional work. We do have it scheduled for paving as soon as all the utility work is done, and I did know more recently, I was just on the street again this morning. I don't think they were out there this morning, but in the last week or so, I saw another group back out there doing some utility work. So I can get you a specific update when that work is completed and when the paving is due to proceed. But I know the road's in rough shape, and I appreciate that. Yeah. Other questions, non-town meeting warrant or town meeting warrant? Anything else happening in town that we're...
Thank you
What
for
are
coming.
they doing on Water Street again?
Yeah, so Water Street had an original investment of undergrounding. I think I brought to this group's attention the fact that the wires that ran the decorative lighting on Water and High Street were direct bury, which means they took an electrical line and put it in the ground 50 years ago, which doesn't do well over time. They should be in conduits to protect against the elements. And the town invested a fairly significant amount of money to replace all of that infrastructure underneath and replace all the period lighting heading toward the mills. The mills,
Paying for that?
the town paid for that piece. The mills have invested heavily, by the way. A new restaurant just opened there, 200-seat restaurant called Jade. They're opening the wine version of a sort of brew pub is opening in that site as well. We now have more people employed at the mills than when Snyder and Converse left. There are now more people employed at the mills than when Snyder and Converse were operating.
Big accomplishment.
It's really, they've done a tremendous job, added some residential units and the like. So we are trying to realign the Water Elm intersection, Water Elm High intersection, because it's a little unaligned currently. And then we're eventually repaving all of Water Street from Main Street down to, is it Clarendon? Cleveland, I think it's all the way down. Yeah, we're going all the way down on that street. So that's,
All the underground is gonna be put in conduit?
it's already happened. Yep, new period lights. We are regularly communicating right now with National Grid and Verizon. The selectmen approved more than a year ago the undergrounding of all utility lines on Main Street, going from Merrimack without the K up the
Negotiating
street.
with them?
Yes, we're starting a process that'll take a long time. If you remember, the Common project took almost 10 years to complete between the design
And
of
paid
the
off
phases.
just 2 years ago, and everybody's built.
Yep, N-Grid, the Verizon one is still not paid off, the N-Grid one is. But we're beginning the process to underground all utilities along Main Street, which we think will be positive from an economic development front.
Costly,
It won't be cheap.
nothing's cheap.
No, there's actually a town bylaw, which is sort of interesting here. The town meeting had passed more than 20 years ago a bylaw, which it indicated instructed the town to underground utility lines in certain areas, primarily Main Street and the Common. I think there's a third area. And so we've completed the Common project, which I think everybody would recognize as a really positive project. Now the Main Street project will begin. It probably won't be concluded till I'm retired, because it'll take that long, but it's an important project that we underground and sort of change the landscape of Main Street.
Downtown.
Yeah. Two final things, and I'll wrap it up with it unless there's any questions. We are in the middle of, the state's in the middle of a $6 million project in the area of Chickering Road and Massachusetts Avenue, which will include more than 6,000 linear feet of new or improved sidewalks, stretching from the middle school and the Kittredge School all the way to the 99. It will improve the drainage in that area. If you go to Heritage Green, anytime after a heavy rain, it looks like a pool in front of some of the buildings. They will improve the drainage in those areas, and they're going to add a significant number of pedestrian improvements in that area, traffic signal at the Atkinson entrance, changing the light configuration. There's a lot of, that stemmed from a 2009 traffic study, which identified that intersection as the third worst in the entire Merrimack Valley from an accident perspective. And they're realigning and restating and redoing all of those lights and reconfiguring that intersection as a way of trying to reduce that, but also adding pedestrian improvements the selectmen have asked for. Those sidewalks are really important connection points, and adding a significant amount of improvements around the Atkinson entrance, something again the selectmen asked for. That's 100% funded by the state, and the project is just south of $6 million. It's at 100% design, and we're excited about the prospect that the state will be spending $6 million on our infrastructure. Yes, sir.
Generators for senior centers, for the elderly housing.
Yeah, so in the CPC, so jointly the Housing Authority Director and I submitted a request to put in generators at the community rooms of all 6 complexes. We have 6 senior complexes, senior housing complexes. 3 of them we would struggle with because 3 of them are powered by electricity, so the heat is electric. And the nature of a generator to power electric heated facilities means the size of the generator is just, would have to be too significant from a cost perspective. 3 of the facilities, the common room facilities, are powered by fossil fuels, which means the generator size should be much smaller in order to power those rooms. And so after doing that analysis, we submitted a request for $80,000 in the CPC, which was approved, which will put generators at the common rooms in 3 of the 6 facilities, which means that during power outages, the seniors in those facilities will have a common room where there's a kitchen, maybe there's some laundry facilities, and ability to meet with other seniors, get out of their individual spaces. Again, we find that folks would prefer staying close to home and not coming, somewhere else. And so this will allow 3 of those 6 facilities. I think what we'll do for the remaining 3 is put in 1 CPC request each of the next 3 years, because if you can imagine $80,000 to power 3 buildings, we may be looking at 3 and 4 times that to power the remaining 3. So we're going to take those up one at a time. By the way, on the Mass Ave Chickering project, it'll be the first time in the region we're going to add backup generators to traffic signals. So one of the things we've really pushed Nope, there'll be backup generators. So when the power outage goes out, we will chain to one of those posts. We'll have a connection.
The street lights?
Yeah, no, the traffic signals.
Traffic signals.
So one of the real problems we have with power outages, in addition to your heat, is the fact that if you want to travel, all the lights go out up and down Chickering Road especially. It's a very dangerous circumstance. I can tell you, the Mass Ave, sort of Osgood one at the Common is really difficult as well. So this will be the first time the town has partnered. Most of those lights are owned by Mass DOT, Mass Highway we used to call them. They've agreed to install the necessary connections that would be able to connect portable generators when the power goes out and leave that intersection fully operational even when power goes out. We're working with them to do that on every signal along Chickering and in other locations. We'll be the first community in the region that will be looking at that kind of backup support.
You have a full crew of, there's 20 generators in town that your crews work on. So this is, you're becoming a small power company independently of National Grid, Andrew.
It's great. It's what I always wanted to be. That's what I always wanted. Okay, we'll pick up your tree limbs now. You made a positive comment.
Thank you.
Other questions, concerns, other things that are happening out there? I know with Irene's assistance, we're piloting a program as part of next year's budget to support families who have folks with either Alzheimer's or dementia, bringing in sort of an ability during the day to service a limited number of folks initially. I want to thank Irene for moving forward with that proposal. I think it's outstanding. I think it's our first step into that. I think we'll be doing more of it in the long term. It's really important. I thank you, Irene, for doing that. I think it's, although typically the budget, there's not a lot of debate about the budget, there are some pretty exciting things in there, and this is one of them. The second is that we're going to be adding a sort of community services social worker type position for the first time in the town's history. We have cases where either police or fire or senior staff show up to complicated circumstances, people with mental health issues, people with shut-ins and other circumstances where, quite frankly, we don't get state support for those positions. Housing authority developments are not just seniors. They're folks who have mental health issues. But those housing authorities don't have the support, on-board support. And so when our public safety folks or other folks trying to provide support to our residents show up, they don't have all the tools, right? If I'm a police officer or a firefighter or a senior outreach worker, I may not possess all of the tools, and I mean that in terms of experiences, to address the concerns that they see out there in the road. We're hiring a full-time person for the first time in the town's history that will coordinate with all of those departments who work directly out of my office. So if there's a situation that the police encounter or fire encounters or the outreach folks or the seniors encounter in which it requires someone who has an experience with mental health issues, maybe drug-related issues, shut-in, hoarding, those kinds of issues, we'll have a staff member who is on site and can make sure that we deliver the appropriate service, direct people to the right services in the region. So that's, I think, the beginning of how government is changing. Local government's changing. It'll change, well after, I keep on talking about my departure, I guess, but well after I sort of leave, is that local government is going to move away from bricks and mortar. We're not going to be a bricks and mortar place in the long term. We're going to have to bring services to where people are. It used to be town government is about sort of the question about senior centers or community centers, whatever we call them. There's an expectation by the public that we're going to bring services to them. And we've done that with ambulances and fire service and police service, but I think you're going to see that changing through everything we do. The state governments only do so much. And when our residents need things, we can either say we don't do it, or we have to step in and fill the gap. And although it can be costly, there's no question in my mind we're going to be filling more of those gaps. We're going to be doing more because the utility companies aren't investing.
They're not doing it.
We're going to be doing more because we have more mental health issues or other related issues, and we need to step into the gap. So we're prepared to take those kinds of steps and make sure that North Andover remains a high-quality place to live. But everybody should recognize there's a sort of changing tide in terms of how government operates. We're aware of it, and we're trying to stay on top of it as best we can. Thank you again. If you have any questions, let's see you. I'll see you at town meeting.
I want to thank Andrew. It was a very, very informative meeting, and we'll have to have him here again. I'm sure.